Really? Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for being here. I hope you had a good lunch. And well, so this is an impromptu session. It was just announced yesterday. And well, the title says Gradle X Machina. The idea of this session is to showcase some things about the Gradle build system. So before I get started, how many of you already use Gradle? All right. And I guess most of you are comfortable with Maven. Yes? No? Maybe? Perhaps. All right. Okay, so we're going to start here. I'm an Oracle employee, which means that I'm obliged to show you this slide, which says, if I were to say anything on Oracle and its properties and you make a purchase or something like that, don't believe anything I say, all right? You are clear to go. Anyway, so Maven is a very well-known build tool. And what many people understand about it is that it has a very basic build file, the POM XML, which has a well-defined language or the number of tags that you can put, nothing more, nothing less. And it's easy to move from one project to the next when you use Maven because the structure is somehow fixed and a little bit strict, perhaps, but easy to understand. Or the many other things that POM has, POM are hierarchical, so you can push common behavior up to a parent POM, and a parent POM have other children inherit from these things. So there is also a lot of tooling out there that allows you that support editing POM files and adding anything that you need in order to make to build your projects. There is also Gradle, which is another build tool that gives you some of the capabilities that Maven does in terms of conventions and the dependency resolution, but it also comes with more flexibility. Now, you may write Groovy scripts or Kotlin scripts for defining the build file. Doesn't matter which DSL you pick, they look almost the same. I personally prefer Groovy. It's just not a personal preference. But the thing is that the Gradle build tool allows you to have pretty much the same behavior as Maven. But there is one caveat. Given that you program your build file, then you can write anything you want in the build file. And because it's so easy to do so, many build files out there are written with lots of programmatic concerns, and it's very difficult to understand what the build is doing. Say that you understand what a particular build does. Once you move to the next project, they follow a completely set of conventions, everything is programmatic, it's a headache. Means most of the times, every single Gradle build out there is custom. So my question is, can we have something like Maven, like structure similar to Maven, on top of Gradle, given that Gradle is so flexible? Well, the answer is yes. So almost a year ago, as a matter of fact, I started writing or condensing all the lessons learned of using Gradle in many open source projects into a series of plugins, which is now known as the Core than Gradle plugins suite. The first link is the GitHub repository. The second link is the guide that tells you the list of all the plugins that this set contains. So let's start with something very basic, which is the file structure. This applies for both Maven and Gradle. There are a couple of ways that we arrange our files in a project. So I will suggest to do just 3 so that it's easy to find what you want to do, what you want to use in a particular project. So let's start with something like I will call the standard version, which is every project resides on the immediate levels of a subdirectory in your root. So there's a root directory and 3 subdirectories, guide, project 1, and project 2. In order to make this happen on the root project and the root POM, we have to define the entries to the modules. Notice that here, those are not names, they're actually paths. But because we're on the first level, the name of the project matches the path to the project. That's something that is convenience. And all the children have to have a reference to their parent. Okay, see, this is easy to understand. What if we move to a 2-level layout? Say, for example, we want the guide to live into the docs directory and project 1 and project 2 under subprojects or modules. Well, the root project has to update, and now we see that it's actually the path to each one of the directories, and the children have to add a new element because if you see here, there is no POM XML here. There is no intermediate one. If we were to put that there, then this common code that we can have for all the subdirectories or all the subprojects, but I decided not to, and because of that, we had to have the extra reference to the path, where to find the parent. And if we were to mix these two, say have projects on the first level, on the second level, or the nth level, then what we end up is something like this. Again, on this side, it's just the path to every directory, and on the first on the top, that is the children that has the first level, and the other is the nth level. In Gradle, we can have something like that as well. You can, if you want, keep the same convention of having build.gradle be the name or your build file, or you can choose your own convention. So personally, I prefer the second convention, because if I were to open that Gradle file on a simple text editor, I know exactly which one I'm referring to. If it were just to be build.gradle and I have multiple tabs with build.gradle, I will get lost immediately to figure out which one it is. Now, for that to work, because we are getting away from the standard Gradle conventions, you have to add a little bit of code. If you follow the conventions, left side. If you decide to rename your projects, then you have to add some code to the settings.gradle file. And remember that I said that once we start putting code into your build files, things start to go crazy. Because, well, 3 subprojects, that's easy. But what about 100? Yeah, things start to get scary. But you could use a plugin. And this is the first one we're going to see. If you apply the settings plugin for the Coordinate Suite, then the only thing that you have to say is, oh, I want to use the standard layout. Perfect. So just do that. And it will automatically do a project scan to figure out which projects match the conventions, whether it's the build.gradle file or is the project name.gradle file. And if you happen to use Kotlin, it will also try to match a .gradle.kts file for you. What about the 2 level? Well, the only change that we did from Maven is the build files, the names. Well, you can do this because we had to change the project there, or you apply the settings plugin, you change the type of layout now to 2 level. You can also restrict the directories that you want to be seen as scan, and in this case, doc subprojects. There you go. So finally, mixing the two. That will require renaming the file and changing also the project directory. So mixing everything that we saw in settings.gradle. So instead of showing all the code that we had to write, just apply the plugin and specify the paths for each one of the subprojects you want to see included, and this takes care of everything for you. Right. So here's something else that you can see is the project DSL. The POM file is easy to understand because it has a well-defined set of entries and blocks. And Gradle DSL is everything you want. So can we have something that is similar to the POM? Yes. How about this? You apply the project plugin, and this enables a new configuration block called config, which looks like a POM file. In here, you see there's the name, vendor, description, and all these values will be used when the POM is generated. We also have links that go into the POM, or you happen to use publication or a Beantray plugin, then those values will also be reused for other plugins. In the case of the people block, this identifies developers, but also contributors and authors will be used to generate information in the POM, but also to format the license headers for all your files. And the project plugin applies all these different plugins that you can apply separately if you want. So let me show you a quick demo of this. Right now, let's go here in IntelliJ. I have a project, happens to be a Gradle plugin, but it could be anything you want to. This particular project contains 2 subdirectories that I like to use. So one is guide. Let's see if can I make these. No, I did not configure the shortcuts yet. New machine, actually. So here you have this guide project, and in the plugins directory, I have another plugin project. If we look into the settings directory here, in the settings file, this applies the settings plugin, and it says, I want to inspect the docs directory and the plugins directory, which will find project 1 and project 2. This project generates a guide based on ASCII Doctor, so it's just ASCII Doctor configuration. That's not very surprising. But the one that is surprising is this one, this project says I only have dependencies. So where else is the behavior that I really want? That behavior will come from the root project, which is found here. This one uses the project plugin that was mentioned before. And here we see the information that looks like the POM file. So there's a name, and vendor, description, tags, links, people, configuration for the Java doc, for a Groovy doc. The license happens to be Apache 2, and some information about bean tree. Now, let's see. I think I wrote something here. So, yeah, let's make it back. OK. So now that I have this, I go into this project, and I can say stuff like this. I have an alias for the Gradle wrapper, and the DSL project also, or the DSL also allows me to have additional tasks. So this is generic from Gradle, asks all the tasks that I have access to. So there are plenty of them for the root. But I can also say something like list all the projects. This is a new task added by these plugins. So it tells me that I actually had 3 projects: root, guide, and the actual plugin. I can ask for the Gradle, the OCI Gradle plugin here. I can ask how many plugins I have applied. It tells me I have 39 plugins because we start counting from 0, like that, like it should. The ID and the class, so if you want to know which properties can be applied based on a plugin or what task, then this will tell you. You can also ask extensions, and it tells you that it has 17 extensions. I can ask for configurations. And by the way, no, if I say show tasks, it will be, I have all these configurations, which are like scopes in Maven. So that's 24 by default. And I can ask more things. But if I just simply say now a clean and do a build, and by the way, I'm also going to publish to Maven's local. Did you know this? That I can just write as little information and Gradle will expand this. Instead of saying publish to Maven local, I can say the same as PewTML. And it will work. It works for all kind of tasks. It had nothing to do with this, this plugin itself. Okay, so it published this, and let's look at the plugins OCI build. And we have all these things that have it for us. Of course, there is the compile classes somewhere there. All these classes, we don't care about those right now. It has generated the Groovy doc because this is a Groovy project. Then it also generated 4 jars, ones that contains Groovy doc, Java doc, sources, and jars. So we want to publish all this to Maven compatible repository or maybe Maven Central. It also generates POM properties and POM XML that go inside the artifact jar. This is something that Maven tools can reuse. And it generates manifests. So one more thing that I'm going to do now is show you the manifest. What I'm doing wrong, Control C. I'm going to show you the manifest of this thing. OCI build TMP jar manifest. And it contains a single entry. One more thing that I can say is through these plugins, I can say release equals true. And when I do this, the manifest will be enriched with new information. So if I look at the manifest again, now it contains this information saying when it was built, who built it, with which JDK, and the git hash commit. So that if you can read this in your projects or you put this in a log file, once the customer comes back saying, I use version 1, but it's not working, and say, well, let me figure out, oh, you have the wrong version, or there's something that doesn't match right. So this makes it much easier for you for debug and to find problems. More things that we can see. I show that we have, let's see, unzip -L plugins, OCI build libs, and the OCI Gradle plugin jar. We have all the classes, but the POM properties file here we have POM XML and the POM properties. These are added also by this series of plugins. And what do we find there? Let's look at that. OCI build, POM XML, and all these things. Where's the start? Here it is. So the POM properties contains this information, just version, group ID, and artifact ID. And the POM XML, this is the minimum XML generated that consumers will use. And this one, I think, was not enriched with the names. Okay. If I look at the generated POM file, this, I believe, is in publications. And then we have main. And here's the POM file. It has the name, description, URL, inception year, license. Notice that when we saw here in the project, we simply say, where is it? Here. We simply say Apache 2. So we have a list of all known OCI licenses, but you can configure your custom license. Then it will take into account this default information already there. Here's this developer, SCM, issue management, and all the dependencies that we need. This just creates automatically. And more things that we can look. I can go back here. And we have aggregated reports for Jacoco. We have formatted headers for licensing, automating the generation of the POM file. Adding source stats. For example, I can say something like GW stats, source stats. That's this. And it tells me that the root project has, well, all this project has 97 files that are Groovy code for a total of close to 4K lines of code. There is more behavior that is provided. Let's go quickly through this because this explains pretty much what we saw. But, yeah, testing. If you want to have a quick feedback when you do tests and which tests have failed, for example, you see in those colors, this line says, I executed 2 tests, which are in white. 2 of them were in green, 0 red, and 0 yellow. Yellow is skipped. And if you were to have more test cases in the same test suite, you will get an aggregate at the end of all these things. So, and more things that we can do. There are additional plugins if you want to do the same thing for Javadoc or for Kotlin. There's Kotlin doc and Scala doc. You can generate BOM files. Clear is for computing binary the binary difference within 2 releases. Guide is something that works with ASCII octo, and integration test and functional test allows you to have additional source tests that are specifically for integration and functional. One more thing that I would like to show is, as you may remember, the Maven POM comes in hierarchies, and at the top of the hierarchy is what is called the super POM that no one can touch except the Maven team. So if you think that you have reproducible builds with Maven, you actually don't, because at any time the Maven team, for reasons they consider necessary, they will update that POM and you cannot touch it. So it's really necessary for you, if you want these reproducible builds with Maven, to fix every single version for every plugin that you have in your build. Gradle doesn't have this problem because there is no super POM in Gradle, and that's kind of sad because the good thing about the POM hierarchy is that you can reuse a lot of behavior. So can we have something like that in Gradle? Yes, we can. We reuse plugins. So let me show you an example of what it could be a Gradle POM, actually something that I already have in production. This is a project that happens to be just a Gradle plugin. And the thing that it does, this Gradle plugin, let me show you the build file, at the end says, I'm going to use a dependency on the project plugin that we saw before. And the application, this plugin says, when I apply my plugin, my custom parent plum plugin, I'm going to apply project and bin tray and do some configurations. And here is the config block that we saw earlier. So when this plugin is applied, it means that the vendor is always going to be core them, and these links will follow certain conventions, and this author will always be available. So when I go to a project that has applied these plugins, for example, I think that Desktop Paint Effect does it. Here you see in this line that it has applied the parent POM plugin, and there has no information about developer except that one, Lincoln Meter. So when I ask this project for its effective settings, which is another task that this plugin does, it will display a lot of information right there. And on the top, we'll see that the vendor happens to be core them, and there's Almiray as the author, and the links. Where is this information coming from? From the parent POM. So, in closing, what I will propose is that if you see in your files, in your build files, programmatic code, push it to a plugin. And as much as you can, try to make it a POM plugin to make sure that you have everything that is particular to your organization or to a set of plugins. Everything that we saw today is open source, these plugins, the Gradle and Maven. So you are consuming these projects, but if you find that there's a problem, the easiest way for you to contribute to open source is file a ticket, open an issue, and that's it. Well, with this, I hope that you find that, yes, Gradle is difficult to grasp, but if we follow the same conventions of Maven, we can get to a better place. So thank you very much. Any questions? All right.
I've got one question.
Yes.
As you can guess, Gradle like to change their API quite often, at least until recently. Did you have any problem when developing your set of plugins?
I do. So Gradle moves very quickly, and they will break binary compatibility even in minor releases if they believe that is the right thing to do.
Okay.
Personally, I have other ways to see things, but as long as you've always, as a rule, don't forget this, use the Gradle wrapper on your project,
okay,
so that the next team member, when that person tries to build a project, will use the right version of Gradle. Because if you do not, and they have a different versions, then we might get into the binary compatibility. When writing your own plugins, your own projects, there is no other way to figure out if there's binary breakage than looking at the release notes of every single release.
Seriously.
So if you use Gradle a lot, I will recommend you to try to be updated as soon as you can, as often as you can, because they release between 6 to 8 weeks, on and on and on. Sometimes it's very hard to keep up.
Thank you. Other questions?
Right. Thank you.